I'm Dwayne Brown. Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition. Thousands of firefighters rushing to knock down 9 major wildfires burning in California. The dry conditions fueling hotspots in San Diego County.
And what's behind the Daily Transcript's upcoming exit? I'm Peggy Pico with lessons learned and the future of news in San Diego. Plus, the Americans with Disabilities Act turns 25, how the ADA transformed access for people with disabilities, and what still needs to be done.
There's really no cultural institution in America that can afford to turn away customers right now.
Potential patrons driving home after giving up on the parking game. The challenge for park leaders who want to make it easier to get to Balboa Park. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us. A lawsuit dismissed in the right to die debate in California. A San Diego judge made it official today. The case challenges a state law banning physician-assisted suicide for patients who request it. The lead plaintiff in the case, a single mother with terminal cancer, was brought to tears by today's ruling.
I'm not sad for myself, even though I know that today's ruling will very likely sentence me to a very, very painful and protracted death.
The judge says it was not his place to challenge or rather change the current law. Her lawyers say they will appeal the decision. Hundreds of firefighters are making progress on a wildfire burning north of the Palomar Observatory. Firefighters say it's about 50% surrounded tonight. Something sparked the so-called cut fire Friday afternoon. It's burned 170 acres in the Cleveland National Forest. Dry chaparral and brush fueled several hotspots over the weekend. No homes are threatened and nearby campgrounds remain open. Forest Service says the fire should be contained by Wednesday. The cut fire is among 9 wildfires burning now in California. More than 5,000 firefighters are responding. Homes are under evacuation orders due to the Lowell fire. That's in Nevada County. 4 firefighters were injured there. And fire crews are gaining the upper hand on the Rag fire burning in Napa Valley. They expect to contain it by tomorrow. Another firefighting tool for San Diego's East County, a new helipad at a Girl Scout camp near Julian, will be used for firefighting, training, and emergency rescues. The helipad will allow CAL FIRE to pre-position choppers close to where they fill up with water to more quickly reach wildfires and put them out. San Diego Gas and Electric funded the project at Camp Wanaka, where the Girl Scouts gather to learn about nature.
We were able to refortify that lake, build it up, and part of the plan was always that it would be there for emergency purposes to fight fires. The SDG&E helped us to fortify the roads going down to the helipad. So now we have the ability to move big equipment down there. So we can play any sport imaginable on, around, and through that meadow and on that helipad.
The new helipad will also be used to rescue injured campers or hikers. Bowing to the sign of the times with sweeping acceptance of gay rights in the country today, the Boy Scouts of America ended its ban on gay adult leaders. Church-operated scout groups will still be allowed to maintain the exclusion for religious reasons. The new policy takes effect immediately. A small research institute is partnering with UC San Diego to fight cancer. The La Jolla Institute for Allergy and Immunology will help strengthen research on cancer and various infectious agents. USC had made overtures to the La Jolla Institute while it was looking for partners, but was ultimately rebuffed in favor of UC San Diego. USC is currently tied up in court over its recruitment of a former UC San Diego Alzheimer's researcher. The end of the line for the Daily Transcript in San Diego. Of course, we first told you the newspaper's closing down after 130 years. Peggy Pico continues our coverage with a look at what this means for the future of the newspaper business.
The Daily Transcript got its start as the National City Record in 1882. Through several owners, it became the Daily Transcript in 1886. But back in the Roaring '20s, the paper evolved into the business and financial publication we see today. A lot has changed for journalists in the last 130 years. Here with a look back and forward are my guests, Dean Nelson, journalism professor at Point Loma Nazarene University, and KPBS news editor Joe Guerin, former editor at the Daily Transcript. And Joe, you were at the Transcript for 14 years or so, correct?
That's right.
And what kind of changes did you see in those 14 years? Was there any anticipation that we were sort of going in this direction?
Certainly, over the 14 years, the paper got smaller. The newsprint version got thinner, fewer ads. The website was picking up some momentum, so that was a plus, but not obviously enough.
Well, I know the paper's publisher released a statement. Robert Loomis said that the shutdown was because of increasing overhead costs. He cited rising healthcare costs and uncertain future in the news industry. But my understanding is the Daily Transcript was the first paper in the U.S. to go online. So why do you think that wasn't viable enough to keep the paper going?
Well, the model just hasn't proven out. They were trying to sell subscriptions for online only, and they were able to sell just not enough to keep that going. And also the advertising dollars that you get for online ads are not nearly what you get for ads that run in the print edition.
So you weren't able to get the income even though they were online and keeping up on that. Well, Dean, you also worked at the Daily Transcript,
yes.
I understand, way back then.
I was a summer replacement for a few summers back in the 80s.
Now, you said you were surprised that the paper actually lasted as long as it did.
I think they've been on a very short leash financially for a long time, and I'm proud of them, actually, that they withstood so much of the pressure. But as Joe said, they were trying to move so much of what they were doing online, as many news organizations have done over the years, assuming that the same kind of advertising work would occur, and advertisers just weren't getting the same kind of response to what they were seeing online as they were from print.
And Joe, what were, just for people who don't know, remind us of the kind of stories that were covered and basically what this publication did?
Well, it covered the business community, which is quite far-reaching, but it focused primarily on commercial and residential real estate, the construction industry, and the legal community. Those were the bread and butter issues, but then also they covered technology, defense, government, nonprofits, and those.
But on a level that was so much deeper than a lot of places.
Yeah, they just looked for a business angle on everything. That's what was so great about the Transcript, is that any news story, they could find some sort of a business or economic angle for it.
Well, what about this? So this paper is closing in September, right?
Right.
It follows the North County Times, which was bought by the UT and then sold or closed down, essentially. And also, most recently, the Union Tribune being bought by Los Angeles Times. So let me start with you.
What's your point, Peggy?
What does this tell you about news here today in San Diego?
What it tells us is that nobody's figured out how to make money at it. And it's still a business. We would love to think of it as kind of a public service. We have this First Amendment that says, that gives us a certain amount of freedom to do what we do, but it's still a business. And nobody has figured out yet how to make it a viable business in the electronic age. That's what it tells us. Yes.
So I'll start with Joe on this one, then the future of news. How do you see it moving forward?
Well, slowly. It's changing dramatically, as we all see. The loss of these publications, and as Dean and I were talking, the need for journalism, good journalism, is greater now than it's been forever, really. And it's going to go in fits and starts. People are going to try new things, and they might have success at it, and measured success. And then, they'll try something else. But there'll always be somebody trying to provide the news in one way or another.
And let me have you weigh in on that, Dean, because do you see it more like a Reuters or an AP? Are we going to have sort of this centralized news and aggregation of news, or do you think that's...
I hope not. I think we need more voices, not fewer. And so what I tell journalism students is we really need people who are great storytellers, people who are great at analyzing data, and people who will go that extra mile to do verifiable information. We need that more than ever. Now, where you're going to be able to exercise those gifts and those needs, that's still being defined. The need is there.
So it's how you define it.
Yeah, and I'm convinced they'll figure it out. I really do.
I certainly hope so. Professor Dean Nelson and KPBS News editor Joe Guerin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ready for challenging combat situations. That's what the Air Force F-22 Raptor was designed for, and so much more. Associated Press reporter Sagar Magani shows us how the stealth jet is being used to combat Islamic militants.
The F-22 Raptor. Roughly $200 million of stealth, sensors, and speed. Pilots who've flown its first combat missions over Iraq and Syria love it.
They did awesome. It's an amazing airplane, amazing capability.
Move forward and get ready.
The F-22 was unveiled in the 1990s as a replacement for aging F-15s. But the program was nearly scrapped amid budget, design, and then safety issues, being grounded for 4 months after pilots complained of a lack of oxygen. The Pentagon sharply cut the number it bought. The F-22 never flew in the Iraq or Afghanistan wars. So far, it's largely been used as a high-tech escort against Islamic State militants, guiding and protecting other aircraft, actually dropping most of the bombs.
It just flies to the battlefield and it'll tell the strike package following it, okay, there's a tactical threat here, you need to avoid that. It's recommend you go in this direction, so it provides some of that awareness that we might not have had prior to it.
The Air Force's F-22 Raptor, the most lethal fighter aircraft in the world.
Officials acknowledge this fight is not the one for which the F-22 was designed. More challenging combat, like evading sophisticated air defense systems, something Islamic State militants don't have.
Flying it where we are now, I would not say is a very dense or a high threat environment.
The F-22 has launched a tiny fraction of coalition airstrikes the past 10 months, like this one in Syria. For the pilots flying those missions, whose identities the Pentagon asked not be revealed for security reasons, the wait has been worth it.
You always have those moments that, I'm sitting in an F-22. This is, I'm pretty darn lucky.
Sagar Magani, Associated Press, Joint Base Langley, Eustis, Virginia.
From jets to cars, Fiat Chrysler may spend hundreds of millions of dollars to buy back defective Ram pickup trucks and Jeeps. It's one of the largest penalties handed out by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. The recall covers 500,000 vehicles with defective parts. Their fuel tanks can rupture, spill gas, and cause fires. The deal settles claims the automaker mishandled nearly 24 recalls. Balboa Park is a popular destination for thousands of folks, but the challenge is finding a place to park. KPBS editor Tom Fudge explains how people are trying to make it easier to visit San Diego's crown jewel.
It's a late morning on a residence-free Tuesday in Balboa Park. Museums are offering free admission and families flock here in the summer. That means the parking lots are packed and cars are on the prowl for a space. One of those who finally made it here is San Diego mom, Mai Lee.
Residence Tuesday is insane. Everybody wants to come to Balboa Park because it's the place to be. It took us about 30 minutes to find parking.
You'll find parking crazy just about any time you try to drive to Balboa Park on a weekend or on days when special events occur. Arguably, the two biggest questions facing Balboa Park in the 21st century are how to maintain the park's infrastructure and how to make it easier to get there. The park has no trolley station. There's a new rapid bus line along Park Boulevard, but people who take it will tell you it's not all that rapid. The people who run the place are as frustrated as the park patrons. Peter Comiskey is executive director of the Balboa Park Cultural Partnership.
I think ever since I've been in Balboa Park, there are periods where parking is an exceptional problem.
Here's the Prado. Tomas Herrera Mischler is CEO of the Balboa Park Conservancy, which is dedicated to financial sustainability of the park.
I think that there's a desperation amongst some people to address the parking issue here. There's a sense of urgency because the cultural institutions, every time someone can't find a parking spot, can't come and go through their doors, they're losing money. And that, you know, there's really no cultural institution in America that can afford to turn away customers right now.
In a deeper sense, the park's dilemma is finding the right balance between space for cars and space for people. 3 years ago, the San Diego City Council confronted that issue head-on when they approved a $45 million plan to remove all parking and car traffic from the Plaza de Panama in the heart of the park. The plan included an 800-space underground parking structure just south of the Organ Pavilion.
And what do? We get a bypass bridge that ruins the front entrance.
But historic preservationists took the project to court, arguing the plan's traffic bypass off the Cabrillo Bridge would be an eyesore on a beautiful historic landscape. In 2013, a district court judge ruled the plan was illegal, but that decision was overturned this year on appeal. Could it now go forward?
It reclaims all of the plazas and promenades in the El Prado historic core.
The money for the plan would have come through a city partnership with philanthropist Irwin Jacobs, who, so far, shows no desire to re-enter the fray. Jacobs, who is also a major contributor to KPBS, couldn't be reached for comment for this story. Everyone I spoke with thinks public transit should be part of the solution for accessing Balboa Park. But Alan Hoffman, a planning advisor and adjunct professor at San Diego State, says accommodating cars is critical.
To be honest, people should be driving to the park because, like when we did a study for the zoo, we found the average automobile occupancy was nearly 3.5 people per car, which means that this is the most efficient parking probably in the entire city.
Any access scenario for San Diego's crown jewel must also include the 1,000-plus people who work in Balboa Park. There is at least one project in motion that would make a dent in the parking dilemma. 650 parking spaces are going in near the back of the Old Globe Theater. The San Diego Zoo is in the process of building a parking garage for its employees. Could the Old Globe use it at night for their theater patrons? The zoo won't comment. Ultimately, the solution to the park's access problems may not be more parking spaces. Balboa Park has many lots, and it's very unusual for all of them to be entirely full. Peter Comiskey says the park needs a better plan for guiding park users to places where they know they can put their cars on a busy day.
One of the best identifiers about the Plaza de Panama plan is that people will come upon one significant parking reserve, and then if that's full, they'll be migrating naturally to a second and then to a third. You won't be just rotating around a car park that may or may not have an availability anytime soon.
Meanwhile, back at Residents Free Tuesday, Jim Caliburg and his wife Chris, former San Diegans who now live in Maryland, told of their adventures trying to park. Eventually, they found a space on Inspiration Point on the edge of the park and a short tram ride to the Prado. They just couldn't get a spot on the tram.
By that point, there were so many young families. They just jammed on there, and we just thought, they should be on the tram with their kids. We can walk, so we did.
Tom Fudge, KPBS News.
You can find more stories about Balboa Park online at kpbs.org/Balboa Park. It's part of our year-long celebration on the heart of San Diego. Get your pocketbook ready. Health insurance costs are going up by about 4%. Covered California says the strategy helps control costs for consumers. More than 1 million people signed up during the last enrollment season. Nearly 90% of those folks qualify for financial assistance. Tomorrow on Midday Edition, why the Health Exchange is claiming a victory on the rate hike. That's on KPBS Radio. Improving access for all, landmark legislation marks its 25th anniversary. The American Disabilities Act protects the civil rights of people with disabilities. Peggy Pico explains why it benefits everyone.
On July 26, 1990, President George H.W. Bush banned employment discrimination against people who have disabilities. The law also required public access through ramps, elevators, and other accommodations. Here with a look at how far things have come and what still needs to be done are my guests, Louis Frick, Executive Director of Access to Independence, and Cindy Jones, a longtime disability rights activist and founder of Mainstream Magazine, which went out of print in 1998. And Cindy, You attended, actually, the signing of this bill back in D.C. Remind us of what's covered under the ADA. Who's covered?
Everyone's covered. If you have a disability, which could be everyone, especially as people age, they will age into disability in most cases. In the beginning, we made it for everyone. Like if you might have high blood pressure, that was covered, or diabetes. But through the litigation that has gone through the Supreme Court, some of those have been cut back a little bit.
So trimmed and learning.
Yeah. So actually, every American was originally covered under this act.
Now, let me ask Lewis about this. You were permanently injured before the ADA actually took effect. So what was it like getting around as a disabled person, either in a wheelchair or with a disability here in San Diego and throughout the country?
You know, first of all, you didn't think about it too much just because that's the way it was. But, you know, thinking back on it, I mean, it's just, it was a much tougher situation. There was far fewer people with disabilities that were out and about. So, you know, it just was kind of an isolating experience because there weren't a lot of places you could go. You know, you had to plan ahead of time. You know, is there going to be a bathroom when I get there? If you don't have your own transportation, how's the bus going to work? So, you know, it was really a process of having to. People with disabilities just have to plan and think ahead, and especially back in the early days, way before the laws were passed, it was even more a difficult situation. So you kind of had to plan every sort of move you were going to make in advance.
Yeah, it's sort of, I think about the seats in movie theaters and at the Potter games, even things like that, elevators and ramps. So how do you think that the Americans with Disabilities Act has actually improved access to everyone?
Well, I think for one thing that, you know, because access has improved, you see so many more people with disabilities out in the community. And as Cindy has said, you know, we look at disability in the broadest sense. So, you know, many people with disabilities have invisible disabilities. Someone that maybe has a psychiatric disability or a heart murmur or something like that. So I think that the community is more full of people with disabilities. It's more natural to see people with disabilities in the community. And I think that's a really important component because you see people in the community realize, oh, they're part of the sort of fabric of society. And the university here, you know, as an example, is a huge community and there's a lot of folks with disabilities. So I think the fact that there are more people out and about because access has improved just sort of it becomes sort of a it generates more community access.
Yeah, more community. And Cindy, I want to, though, on that note, a lot of improvements, but the ADA has not lived up to its promise in some ways. Which ways do you think it still needs some improvement?
Well, I think that we need to focus on employment because without the economic advantages of having a job, people with disabilities will still be in poverty and not be able to afford housing and the other things that most people take for granted. So I would like us to see really focusing on access to employment in the future.
But the law says you can't discriminate because of employment.
It does say that, and the unfortunate fact is, you know, there is still a 70+ unemployment rate among people with disabilities that want to go back to work. So that's a staggering number, and it has changed very little in the last 30 or 40 years. So while the law says, yes, you must not discriminate,
it's still happening.
I
need to end it on this, and I'll start with you, Cindy. So next 25 years, what would you like to see, maybe even immediately, happen to improve accessibility or acceptance for people with disabilities?
I'd like to see people actually go out and live their life. Get out in the community, because what changes the community is people going out into the community. Yep. As long as we stay in our houses, nobody has to change, nothing has to change. But so I'd like to see everyone go out and celebrate the ADA and get out there and be part of the fabric of America.
And how about you, Lewis, specifically? Do you see like maybe the employment laws changing? Where would you like to see the next steps for this go?
I would really like to, 25 years from now, I would like to see just a broader society that doesn't look at, what your differences are and just accepts the fact that we all have some variety. We look different in some fashion or another, and that people with disabilities are accepted equally like everybody else in the society. Nothing more than that.
All right. Lewis Frick and Cindy Jones, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
The architect who designed the look of the San Diego Coronado Bridge has died. Robert Mosier was 94 years old. KPBS culture reporter Angela Carone has this profile.
Anyone flying into San Diego takes notice of the iconic Coronado Bridge. In a 2010 interview, Robert Mosier said working on the bridge was one of the great periods of his life. But he also said the bridge engineers should get equal credit for the design.
And I only was the architect designer who influenced the way it looked. I didn't figure out how to make the pylons, how much steel to put in the pylons.
Together, Mosier and the engineers designed the curve of the bridge, which was necessary to create enough height for Navy ships to pass underneath. Larry Hoeksema is a principal at Mosier Drew, the architecture firm Robert Mosier founded in 1946. He says Mosier considered every detail on that project.
But then also a sensitivity to the supports, as to how those supports, those very graceful arched supports, as to how they would read, how you'd see them as you observe them from whether if you're in a boat or in a car looking at various distances from Coronado, wherever it may be.
Mosier also designed the NBC high-rise downtown. He was the master architect for Muir College at UCSD. He also designed museum additions and many local residences. Hoeksema says Mosier will be remembered as a champion of simple, modern design and as a great storyteller. Angela Carone, KPBS News.
There's a slight chance of some rain later in the week in the county, as well as increased humidity. We're looking at a mix of sun and clouds by the beaches over the next couple of days, 70s and 80s. Warmer inland, temperatures in the 80s and 90s there. 80s expected for the mountains with a slight chance of rain and lightning by Wednesday. Triple digits in the desert. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. You have a great night.